Speaking of the past, remember the legend of John Henry. He was a steel-driving man on the Big Bend Tunnel in West Virginia who got into a race with a steam-powered hammer. John Henry won the race, only to die in its wake. Nowadays, some workers face a different kind of competition. Check this out from Wired magazine.
No, this isn't a runaway truck, and no, it's not an outtake from the action movie Speed. This is a conventional 18-wheeler that drives itself, thanks to a $30,000 retrofit. San Francisco startup Otto, which Uber bought this summer, made history with this truck. It completed the world's first truck autonomous delivery, carrying 50,000 cans of Budweiser from a brewery in Fort Collins, Colorado, to Colorado Springs, 120 miles away.
Creepy. Technology like that could appear to be a threat to workers, and some say it's a reason to be careful about raising wages or benefits. But what kind of risk does automation present? And are there rewards to think about, too, for U.S. workers? Here to discuss the issue with us are two non-robots, James Parrott from the Fiscal Policy Institute. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you.
And J.W. Mason, an economics professor at John Jay College. Very good to have you here. John Jay, since you're the professor, we'll have you give us a brief history lesson. People have been talking about automation for a long time. We think about the Industrial Revolution. We think about the 1950s when there were images of space cars that were going to cart us around the city. Up to this point, up to this moment, what has automation's effect on the typical worker been?
Well, I think we have to say, as you said, there's a long-standing fear about robots taking the jobs going back to the Industrial Revolution. And I was just looking at a Time magazine story from 1961 before I came in here about the automation jobless and how, and you can find, this recurring almost every recession. Particularly, it seems like there are predictions that unemployment is going to now last forever thanks to robots. We may remember Jeremy Rifkin's The Jobless Future. Stanley Ronowitz, I think, wrote a book about the end of work around the same time. This is a regular cycling fear. Obviously, the fraction of people in paid employment in the U.S. and most other countries has gone up over time, not down. If you go back 100 years ago, close to half, about 40% before World War I of the American population worked in agriculture. Today, it's 2%. Those people are not unemployed. So in the narrow sense of there being not enough work to go around as a result of automation, I think history gives us a lot of reason to be skeptical about that. And I think economic data, maybe I'll come back to this, I think economic data, if anything, should make us even more skeptical that this specific form of the fear is something that we have to be thinking about today. But I think there are a larger set of issues about skills and control and autonomy in the workplace where we should be concerned about automation.
We'll talk about that soon, but I want to bring you in, Jim. So why are we having this conversation now? We have had machines for a long time, since the cotton gin, that have affected people's relationship to their work. What is unique? Is there anything unique about this moment and where technology is now?
Well, we're certainly seeing a lot of advances and increased use of technology, although historically I don't know that it's increased more than it has in the past, but there are always things happening in terms of technological change, and we're starting to see that there's a lot of experimentation with driverless cars and trucks. iPhone apps are being used to control a lot of things, and these affect people's everyday lives and the way they think about working in society and living in society. So understandably, it's a natural topic of conversation. But when you look at, has there been a lot of investment in new technologies on a scale that's likely to seriously encroach upon the total job growth? It's harder to find evidence of that. Now, one thing is we certainly have an underemployment problem. We could use more jobs. The more fundamental problem is that we could use a lot more better jobs than what we have. I would say that a much bigger issue than the impact of technology on work is whether or not the jobs we have, many jobs are not, really amenable to automation in the near future. How do we make those better paying jobs so that people can support families, that they work in institutions and labor markets where there's an opportunity for advancement and an incentive to invest more in your own skills and knowledge so that you can get ahead?
Speaking of some jobs and how susceptible they are versus others, let's watch a clip about an automation effort that's going on at a very popular service employment focus. Can we show that clip?
The brand may be familiar, but the way they are serving customers is changing. This is one of the first McDonald's to start using automated kiosks to take orders. How it works is that instead of walking up to a traditional cash register and giving your order to a human, you walk up to a computer screen, swipe, and press on the long list of options to make your sandwich and your salad. Then grab a table and wait for your meal to be delivered. But it's not just McDonald's getting more automated. Competitors, Panera Bread has already moved towards taking orders via kiosks. Domino's Pizza has a mobile app, and you can place orders via the website.
So research on this that I've read indicates that while it's true that most jobs can't really be automated away, some jobs are more vulnerable to that. And service sector jobs like McDonald's and other fast food places, we would think those would be prime candidates. Do you think that's true?
Right, and to the extent that those are not necessarily the most satisfying or enriching jobs, the wages historically have been very low, although one very positive thing that's happened in New York State and California in the past year is passage of a phased-in $15 minimum wage. So a lot of people are concerned that increased wage pressure is going to accelerate the trend toward automation in fast food. Generally, I think that's a positive thing because research shows and our own experience shows that as fast food employers become more productive at that, they can better sustain paying better wages to the workers that they do have. And with workers generally in society benefiting from the higher minimum wage, up to a third of New York State workers will benefit from that ultimately. That will create demand for other products and businesses to hire other workers.
But isn't that kind of a corollary to the argument about international trade? I mean, for years when people raised concerns about trade, the Paul Krugmans of the world talked about how it would be good for everybody. It turns out there were winners and losers. Wouldn't there be winners and losers from a major push to automate some of the jobs we do now out of existence?
Well, I mean, there's an obvious difference here that you can point to right off the bat, which is that these are fast food jobs. These are not good jobs. The jobs that were destroyed, supposedly by trade, were high-paying, stable, secure industrial jobs. So I think we're a little bit comparing apples to oranges there. But I think there's a larger reason why this is good news, and I agree with James that we should be pleased to see this. And that's because it means there's more space in the economy for economic growth. It means there's more space to raise wages. When you raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour, McDonald's doesn't go out of business. They learn how to produce more efficiently, and that's a good thing. It means we can keep raising wages. If you want to know who's the threat to jobs right now, it's not robots. It's not probably Donald Trump at the moment. It's nice Janet Yellen from Bay Ridge. Why? Because she's the head of the Federal Reserve's Open Market Committee. She's the one who's voting to raise interest rates because she thinks we have too many jobs. We need higher unemployment to keep the economy from overheating. Well, when I see a story like we just saw about McDonald's, I see a story about how actually we have lots of space for more economic growth. We have space for more stimulus, and we have space for more wage increases because businesses can find ways to adapt to that. And that's an argument for running our economy, what they used to call a high-pressure economy, for letting unemployment fall further. But if you ask why is unemployment not falling further, at the moment, it's not because there's no jobs because of robots. It's because the Fed doesn't want it to.
So, I mean, I guess that raises the question of whether the discussion about automation is a deliberate distraction by folks away from interest rate policy or people who want to talk about that instead of raising the minimum wage. Do you think this is a genuine concern, or is this being kind of trumped up, to coin a phrase, by people who don't want to talk about raising wages?
It's something that's real and it's happening. And when people see that, they see that Pittsburgh is, allowing Uber and other companies to test out driverless cars. So it is affecting our economy and livelihoods in neighborhoods today. So it's legitimate that people be concerned about that. But and it's good in a way that it gets us into a discussion about jobs and wages and where people get their wage income from and the quality of jobs and so on. And that's a discussion we should have because that will take us right to the position that we need to do more to raise wage levels across the country. And that will allow workers to get better pay. It will also induce greater investment on the part of management in ways to increase productivity, which doesn't always take the form of investing in technology. There are lots of ways that businesses can improve their bottom line by investing in their workforce and reorganizing the workplace and rethinking their businesses. So the minimum wage is a powerful source of pressure to improve the functioning of the economy And that's definitely very positive.
Professor, you alluded in your first answer to the fact that technology, there might be a broader threat we're ignoring about how technology is changing people's relationship to work and other issues like that. I mean, I think about, we talk about Uber, we talk about Lyft, obviously facilitated by people's access to smartphones. You know, cheap calling technology makes call centers feasible. So when it comes to technology in the workplace, if it's not that robots are going to take all of our jobs, what should we be worried about?
As far as Uber goes, their business model, as far as I can tell, has two parts. One is skirting or violating, labor regulations around taxi driving, and the other is ripping off credulous venture capitalists. So I'm not really worried about Uber.
The poor venture capitalists. We'll speak for them.
If those guys want to subsidize our taxi travel for a few years, we should take their money. But I think that if you look at the broader historical picture, what you see is there are areas of work that have been targeted for automation, and that doesn't just mean replacing people with robots. It means reorganizing the whole productive process. And often that's because those are places where you have dependence on highly skilled workers, organized workers, often relatively militant union workers. Classic case is the docks, where this is an industry that, a couple generations ago was a major industry here in New York, most other port cities, involving a lot of people loading and unloading ships. That industry has been a sort of a poster child for automation with containers. And it's moved out of the city, and it's much less labor intensive. But it's not just a matter of taking a person out and putting a robot in. It's about reorganizing the entire industry around this new technology of containers, which means actually changing the way things are packaged, shipped, all that stuff. And two, it doesn't just happen sort of naturally because this is a more efficient way of doing things. It happens, I think, very clearly in this case because this is a particularly well-organized, militant group of workers who are resistant to other types of pressure from their bosses, from their employers. So I think that's the sort of thing we should be worrying about. Not will there be jobs, but who's going to have decision-making authority. And technology in cases like that is used when you've got a group of workers who've actually claimed a significant amount of authority for themselves to move that back up to the center. And it's easy to imagine in construction, let's say, where there's still a dependence on skilled labor, often union members, in healthcare, where it's not just a question of bringing in robots, but reorganizing the work process, let's say, to make the sort of the idea of making construction more modular, so you have a lot less labor at the building site. That would be the sort of thing I would worry about, where it's not just a matter of like with the kiosk, having a robot do this particular task or a machine do this particular task, but changing the way the whole construction process is done, from assembling a building from relatively basic components on site to modular ones, where you're really shifting the control and the authority and the autonomy and the work somewhere else.
One thing that strikes me about that McDonald's clip, and this is probably the last thing we'll have time to discuss, is so much of this is about consumer behavior, what consumers are prepared to deal with. I mean, punching a screen to pick your order, there's nothing all that unusual about it, but we are all now programmed to do that because we have smartphones. Whatever the fears are about automation technology, Jim, as consumers, how should people behave to make sure that that the economy heads in the right direction and that the right kind of work is rewarded? Are there choices we can make in the line at McDonald's or when we're shopping online or elsewhere?
Right. So that's an excellent question because one of the, in thinking about how businesses will respond in very labor-intensive industries that typically pay low wage, how they will respond to an increased minimum wage. Because employers have been able to rely on cheap labor for so long, that's allowed them to keep prices down. And consequently, that's one of the factors that leads us to have a low overall inflation environment, which is certainly no reason for Janet Yellen and the members of the Federal Reserve to start raising interest rates. But consumers should understand that, there may need to be modest price increases in fast food restaurants and sit-down restaurants and so on, in retail, in response to the fact that employers are now having to pay significantly more to workers than they did before. If you think about it in terms of the positive effect that has on the workforce, then paying a nickel more for a Big Mac is not such an onerous thing.
Well, thank you both for an excellent discussion, very non-robotic. Hopefully they haven't replaced us all back in our respective workplaces when we return, but thanks very much for being on.